What happened near Pokrovsk over the past 48 hours is not simply another battlefield update. It is not one more shift on a map, nor a temporary setback that analysts will forget by next week. What unfolded was the most dramatic structural collapse inside Russia's offensive machine since the beginning of the year, a rupture so sudden, so uncontrolled, that it stunned even Ukrainian commanders who have spent months fighting under relentless pressure. For weeks, Russian state media declared that Pokrovsk was the next great breakthrough, the next inevitable victory, the next domino that would tumble under Moscow's advancing forces. The Kremlin's narrative was clear. Pressure, numbers, and persistence would overwhelm Ukraine's defense. But on the ground, something very different was brewing. Ukrainian reconnaissance units were watching a dangerous overextension take shape, long columns of Russian armor pushing too fast, supply lines stretching too thin, and frontline battalions that depended on a single, overworked logistics hub positioned far closer to the fighting than Russian doctrine normally allows. And when Ukraine struck that hub, everything Russia had built near Pokrovsk unraveled with breathtaking speed. The collapse was not just physical. It was psychological. It was organizational. It was systemic. And for the first time in many months, Russia's offensive didn't just slow. It didn't just bend. It broke. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand the strategy Russia believed it was executing. For nearly a month, Russian commanders pushed wave after wave of armor, artillery, and infantry toward Pokrovsk. Their approach was brutal in its simplicity. Overwhelm the defenders through sheer quantity and persistence. Armored columns rolled across muddy fields at dawn. Missile strikes rained down on Ukrainian trenches at night. Drones circled for hours, waiting to catch any movement in the open. And infantry units, some experienced, others barely trained, were forced forward in relentless assaults intended to chip away at Ukrainian morale. But none of it worked the way Moscow expected. Ukrainian defenders did not panic. They did not retreat in confusion. Instead, they absorbed the pressure. They logged every artillery pattern. They tracked every armored push. They noted exactly where Russian units were overextending themselves and exactly where their supplies were starting to lag behind their ambition. Ukrainian intelligence began to see a picture emerging. Russia was moving faster than it could sustain. Fuel trucks were traveling dangerous distances without proper escort. Ammunition deliveries were delayed. Communication networks were stretched thin, overloaded with constant coordination demands. The harder Russia pushed, the more predictable it became. And predictability in war is a weakness. So Ukraine waited, patiently, quietly. They gave up small patches of ground to draw Russian units deeper. They allowed the front to shift, inch by inch, until Russian forces were standing on terrain that looked like opportunity, but was actually a carefully constructed trap. And when everything was aligned, Ukraine triggered it. The turning point came at dawn, when a Ukrainian precision strike hit a Russian logistics hub that had become the nerve center of Moscow's entire Pokrovsk operation. The hub stored fuel, shells, communication gear, mobile command vehicles, and the supplies feeding at least 3 Russian battalions. Russia believed the position was safe, partially shielded, partially concealed, and supported by electronic jamming equipment. But Ukraine had been watching it for days. The moment the missile hit, the battlefield changed. Fuel trucks ignited instantly, erupting into towering flames that sent black smoke spiraling into the sky. Ammunition vehicles detonated in rapid succession, each explosion triggering the next, until the entire depot went up like a chain of fire. Satellite images taken later showed nothing but scorched earth where Russia's essential supplies had once been. But the physical destruction was only half the story. Russia's front line suddenly went silent. Radios hissed with static. Orders arrived late, garbled, or not at all. Command posts lost their ability to coordinate artillery. Tank crews waited for fuel that never came. Entire companies were left unsure whether they were advancing, defending, or retreating. Chaos spread faster than the fire. One domino had fallen, and it was enough to topple the entire system. In modern warfare, confusion is often more destructive than firepower. What unfolded near Pokrovsk is the perfect example of that truth. Some Russian units, still believing the offensive was underway, continued pushing forward into areas Ukraine had already reinforced. Others, hearing the explosions behind them, assumed they were surrounded and fled in disorganized, panicked clusters. Tank crews abandoned vehicles with engines still running. Artillery units fired blindly, unsure where Ukrainian forces were moving. Officers shouted into radios that no longer connected, issuing orders that no one could receive. Drone footage captured Ukrainian soldiers watching in disbelief as Russian units crumbled without direct engagement. Across the entire sector, coordination, the lifeline of any military operation, evaporated. And Ukrainian forces did not hesitate. Artillery struck groups of Russian soldiers attempting to regroup. Infantry teams moved swiftly to reclaim trenches that had been lost only days earlier. Engineers dismantled abandoned Russian equipment. In some cases, Ukrainian units found warm meals left on tables inside Russian dugouts. That is how fast the retreat had been. What was supposed to be Russia's next breakthrough had become one of its most chaotic and humiliating breakdowns. News of the collapse spread inside Russia faster than the Kremlin could censor it. Military bloggers, normally some of the most loyal voices of the regime, erupted with rage. Their posts accused commanders of incompetence, questioned the integrity of battlefield reports, and demanded accountability from the Ministry of Defense. Families of soldiers began posting videos demanding answers. Mothers asked why their sons had gone silent, why units disappeared from contact for days, why commanders were giving contradictory explanations. Even Russian state television, which for months had promised constant momentum, changed its tone. Words like advance and inevitability quietly vanished. Segments grew cautious, analysts became vague. The new phrase of choice was complex battlefield dynamics. That's the space over the next time. Behind closed doors, according to intelligence leaks, senior officers argued openly about who was responsible. Logistics blamed commanders. Commanders blamed intelligence. Intelligence blamed overextension. And almost everyone blamed Moscow's political leadership for pushing an offensive that the military couldn't sustain. It wasn't just a collapse on the front line. It was a fracture inside the entire Russian system. While Russia scrambled to rebuild its narrative, Ukraine experienced a surge of morale that had been missing for months. For soldiers who had endured weeks of bombardment, the sight of abandoned Russian armor, untouched ammunition stockpiles, and retreat paths littered with gear was more than a tactical win. It was emotional validation. It proved that discipline and patience can defeat brute force. It proved that intelligence and coordination still matter. It proved that Ukraine can, at the right moment, seize the initiative. Frontline units reported a renewed sense of purpose. Commanders spoke of momentum shifting. Analysts began to reassess the region, calling the event a strategic rupture rather than a tactical surprise. Pokrovsk is no longer just a hotspot on the map. It has become a symbol, a reminder that Russia's offensive machine is not invincible, and that Ukraine's ability to strike with precision can change the course of the war. The collapse near Pokrovsk wasn't a single mistake. It wasn't a fluke. It was the exposure of a deeper truth the Kremlin has tried to hide. Russia's battlefield machine has critical weak points, and when those weak points are targeted, the entire formation can unravel. Ukraine didn't defeat Russia with numbers. It didn't overwhelm them with manpower. It defeated them with intelligence, timing, and discipline. Three things that cannot be mass-produced. Pokrovsk shows that this war is shifting into a new phase, not one defined by endless attrition, but by precision, by coordination, by psychological and structural pressure, by the ability to strike the right target at the right moment and let the collapse spread on its own. For Russia, the message is clear. Logistics failures can destroy an offensive. Communication breakdowns can shatter morale. And another collapse of this scale could shift the entire front. For Ukraine, the message is even stronger. The line can hold. The tide can turn. Momentum can be regained not through hope, but through strategy. Tonight, Pokrovsk stands as proof that the war is not predetermined. It is not fixed. It is still a living struggle in which intelligence and timing can outweigh raw numbers. And this moment, this collapse, may be remembered as the spark that reshaped the months ahead. If this breakdown helped you see beyond the headlines and into the deeper currents of this war, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who follows global events closely, and subscribe so you'll be here with me for the next story that truly matters.